The time for gentlemanly debate over nuances is over. It's fight or die, and you cannot fight a war by committee. A commander is needed, and we have one. And it's time for people of Kentucky to remind our Republicans in Congress of that fact. Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality has a seat at the table. Today I want to address a few issues that are top of the news, so let's get started. Missing in action, Kentucky's Attorney General. If I hear Kentucky Attorney General Russell Coleman once again start a speech thanking me and others for voting for him, I think I'm going to walk out. He's like the ugly girl that got asked out for the prom, third in line, and overly grateful. But enough for that. For heaven's sakes, as the old saying goes, quit looking a gift horse in the mouth and do something for a change. Every week you hear on the national news of some other state's attorney general making headlines because they took the initiative to challenge the Democrat left or some left-wing organization trying to undermine our country. Now, Coleman may be a Me Tooer, but where is he on challenging our boy governor who wants to be president? And he's essentially heard little from Coleman. But when Governor Beshear was AG, I'll remind everyone, the Republican governor was getting sued almost every day. Democrats know how to play the game. Republicans don't. Initiative doesn't seem to be in their dictionary except for the brave and the true. They are the fighters that keep us free, and they are way outnumbered. Not so much by Democrats, but far more by other Republicans who simply will not stand up and fight. Yes, it's time for Coleman to drop how appreciative he is and start telling us how he is taking the battle to the left and is going to up his star image, that is undetected for now, around the country and prove to the nation that Kentucky Republicans aren't always anti-Trump. I want to hear what progress he has made against the Nancy Pelosi-type governor we have, who now has his eyes set on the presidency. Thanks in part to Coleman, Beshear has a paved path to try to inflict his radicalism on the rest of the country. Don't look to Coleman to do anything aggressive or of any note. Now, I hold out hope there will be a change, but only time will tell. We need some hound dogs out there looking for him and tell him we expect more. Once again, I fear that we have another Republican in office who wants to be liked and loved by Democrats who will never like them or love them or agree with them. It's the same horror story we had with John McCain. As many should remember, McCain was always siding with the Democrats, cozying up to the left. But when he ran for president, the Democrat knives came out and they were brutal with McCain, and he deserved every bit of it for being so naive and stupid. But here's the latest. Coleman has apparently appointed Democrats of late to positions in his office. Well, that's the Trojan horse, isn't it? You will never see that from a Democrat. So what can you do? Well, his office phone number is online. Time to start inquiring. As I've said many times with these elected officials, you can't just elect them and throw the keys at them and say good luck. If you do, they will gladly collect their paycheck and never deliver what they promised you. Now, let's talk about another related item regarding a Republican, and that over 60% of Kentuckians voted for Trump. Think about that. Call your U.S. Senator and remind them Kentucky Republicans have a problem. Kentucky arguably has the most anti-Trump Republican delegation in Washington, even though their constituents voted well over 60% for Trump. So much for being a representative of the people. Kentucky has 2 Republican senators in Washington, but you wouldn't know it by their opposition to Trump. In fact, we have a Republican House member in Congress who can't find anything to vote for, much less what President Trump proposes. Let me remind everyone that without Trump, the Republicans in the U.S. Senate and House would be in the minority today. How about a little gratitude? On a technical and philosophical level, I would academically agree with some of these Republicans, but the enemy is at the gate. A lack of self-awareness and attachment to reality is called a psychosis. The Democrat left have nearly destroyed this country and we are basically still in intensive care. The prognosis is uncertain as to whether we can undo the damage in the time left before the midterm elections. But don't tell our Kentucky Republicans in Washington that, because they still think we're living in 1787 when the enemies of life, liberty, and happiness were not in control and we had a more morally centered populace. Philosophy, theory, and ideology don't work when you are about to lose it all. In Kentucky, Trump, again I say, received over 60% of the vote, but our Kentucky representatives in Washington have forgotten the meaning of the term representative. They simply do not see the enemy and the danger from the Democrat left. Now, to be fair, there are about 4 House members from Kentucky that do cooperate with the president, not so with the rest. This is no time to split hairs. It's all hands on deck in war, and we are at a war in this country, particularly with the leftists. It is no time to engage in negotiation. It's time for unity. It's time to listen to your commanding officer, and we all know what happens when you don't obey the commanding officer's orders. The whole nation elected one man as their leader, and the rest are representatives to do the will of the people. The time for gentlemanly debate over nuances is over. It's fight or die, and you cannot fight a war by committee. A commander is needed, and we have one. And it's time for people of Kentucky to remind our Republicans in Congress of that fact. Now, this is not just a Kentucky issue. The margins are so slim in the House and Senate that what our Kentucky delegation does or doesn't do impacts the whole nation. Kentucky is red, but apparently not some of its Republican delegation in Washington. And as a lesson for other states, you must keep your Republican leaders' feet to the fire and tell them to get in line or get out. We are about to do that in Kentucky. This is not time for fine-tuning that risks Republicans being wiped out in the midterms. Open debate that communicates division only aids and abets the enemies of our country. It's time to get on board with the Trump agenda, as to do otherwise only helps our adversaries. So unite or leave. Now, I want to morph into another topic which is related, and that's the Texas redistricting issue that's a hot topic right now in top of the news. And oh, how the Democrat left squeals like a pig when it gets stuck with the very same sword they stick everyone else with. And I'm referencing how the Democrats are concerned about Republican redistricting efforts in Texas. Consistent with their character, the Democrat left ignores the fact they have done the same thing for years in California, Illinois, and New York, such that they've turned those 3 states into communist states where there is little, if any, Republican representation. In fact, these are the states that have the greatest numbers of people leaving for states like Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. The Democrats cannot tolerate anyone but themselves to be in power. That's their authoritarian nature. This was studied and written about by Dr. Kramer in Psychology Today, who says it is the character of the liberal left to be authoritarian. That is what so many of us have been saying for years. Now you see the Democrat lawmakers in the Texas legislature leaving the state and running to the borders to keep any laws from being passed by the Texas legislature by denying them a quorum. Now, this is a crime in and of itself because they are not doing their job. But never mind it being criminal, because that's who and what the Democrat left is. Fortunately, the governor of Texas has the right to arrest them, and they should be removed from office for dereliction of their duties. The Republicans in Texas must stand strong, as must other Republicans around the country. Give the Democrat left no quarter, because they'll never give you any quarter. Now, this leads me into what's going on with Representative Kevin Kiley, a Republican of California. And he is taking a bold action to block what he calls a brazen and corrupt power grab by Governor Gavin Newsom, introducing federal legislation to ban mid-decade redistricting nationwide and to protect the integrity of California's voter-approved Citizens Redistricting Commission. This is a very poorly thought-out measure. The totally Democrat-controlled California has already wiped out Republican representation, and now Representative Kiley, a Republican, wants to keep Texas, where Californians are fleeing to, from preventing in Texas what has happened to California by redistricting mid-decade. There is no rule or law against this, and Texas has the right to do that. More importantly, it could save the Republican majority in Congress in 2026. 40% of Californians vote Republican, but only have a handful of seats out of the 52 they have in Congress now. Governor Newsom is already planning on reducing Republican representation to 3 seats out of the 52, which Kiley has no chance of stopping whether his bill passes or not. But it would prevent Texas from balancing out the equation by adding 5 new Republican seats in Congress. Folks, we really do need an IQ test for people who run our country and hold elected office. Once again, Republicans need to clean house of those who can't spell strategy, much less practice it. It is these kinds of Republicans who deliver us defeat time and time again. Who knows, maybe they aren't Republicans, but just in name only. Well, Kentucky is dealing with the same problem in Representative Massey. Hopefully, Californians will replace Kiley with a real Republican, as we hope to do in Kentucky with Massey. Now let's move on to Democrats are getting more radical. Next, I want to talk about developing news out of New York with the rise of Democrat mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. There's an article in the New York Sun titled, "Far-left Mamdani would be a wrong turn for Democrats who need to move beyond intersectional obsessions and woke grievances." Well, I agree with that, but it's an opinion piece written by Josh Hammer, who argues that his party, the Democrats' association with the far-left candidates like Mamdani is counterproductive to the Democrat Party's electoral viability. Hammer argues that the Democrats need to move beyond Mamdani, a self-described Democrat socialist, onto more pragmatic candidates who are less identity politics centric. Folks, Mamdani is not a socialist. Democrats just use that as a euphemistic term to hide what they really are, which is all of what the Democrat Party has been doing for so long. They hide what they are because they all have Marxist attitudes and leanings. And to prove the point even more so, there is another self-proclaimed Islamic Marxist running for mayor in Minneapolis as a Democrat. Now, this is just more of what liberals are. And like Dr. Kramer said with regards to the character of the left, they're all authoritarian. And so what's happening with regard to what's going on in Britain right now? Well, they're lowering the voting age. The left made international headlines in July in lowering the minimum voter age. And listen to this headline from CNBC. The UK gives 16-year-olds the right to vote. Brace for social media politics. Well, the article argues that while lowering the voting age boosts youth engagement, it critically highlights the increased challenge of social media's influence and the urgent need for political education to inform young voters. But I want to say something that should be obvious. It has nothing to do with social media, and the last thing the left wants to do is educate anyone, because this is all fostered by the Marxist left. Their ideas never sell, they only kill. As history has proven, the left's ideas depend upon the uneducated, because they always fall for the same old promises which the left continues to make, namely free everything, as if government is the creator of wealth and that they are your God and should be worshipped. Just like Ronald Reagan once said, government is not the solution, it's the problem. And as it has also been said, anyone, including the government, that promises you everything is sure to deliver you nothing. So lowering the age to 16 means that the left needs uneducated voters. Come on, folks, 16-year-olds need to be in school, learning how to navigate life and developing skills that they will need to live a prosperous and productive life. They also need to be learning the differences between good and evil. Allowing 16-year-olds to vote should be a clarion call to the whole world that the left is ready to declare war for their fever dream of world dominance. Now, let's move on to another topic, which is also topping the headlines right now, and that's what I call the two overpaid losers. And Rush Limbaugh warned us, and he was right. And I'm talking about Stephen Colbert and Kamala Harris. in their recent get-together. So what is so amazing about Harris and Colbert is that any observant viewer could see that both were empty suits. Their only talent was to be compliant puppets, but even that was not enough to hide their profound incompetence. Kamala Harris, who has disgraced this country's history by having the title of vice president, somehow checked all the boxes for her identity with the right people who wanted optics as opposed to talent. After all, they, the deep state, and the hidden global cabal were really going to be the vice president, and the president, to be precise. They just needed a front man or woman that they could use to cover for them. They just needed her long enough so that they could push through their authoritarian agenda. They knew she was of low IQ, but with their money, they could gaslight the country long enough, and with the aid of their controlled media types, that they could get by with it long enough. Then we have the talentless eunuch Stephen Colbert, who only got laughter out of polite embarrassment from his audiences or the leftist groupies. He too was a puppet with a hidden purpose dreamed up by the cabal behind him. Now, what he accomplished for them is unclear. Trump is president again, despite Colbert's attempt to indoctrinate enough people to swing the election. Moreover, Colbert was losing his employer, CBS, over $40 million a year. I'm not so sure who was the stupid one, but if I were a stockholder in the company, I would be suing the board of directors and officers for gross negligence and malfeasance. They would be out of a job, and I would be poking holes in their golden parachutes for a hard landing. The recent on-air get-together of Harris and Colbert, these two examples of idiocracy, was absolutely astounding. Of course, they could smile because they have millions in the bank due to stupid people who patronize them, and in Colbert's case, watched his political lectures every night. And no, I did not watch Colbert for this segment. It was challenging enough to read of the account of those two. Well, I'm glad they are gone, or going. Even though their departure is just a drop in the bucket, it's a start. Let's create more of the losers exiting the stage by not patronizing them. Vote with your wallets, folks. It's the surest way to cut short their toxic influence and lies. Now, the last thing I want to address is the topic of Harvard. I want to comment on the developing story that the New York Times has been meticulously reporting on. It's regarding Harvard's ongoing legal battle with the Trump administration. I just want to comment on this by saying that Harvard can quite literally be considered one of our enemy's first beachheads in America. It represents many ideas that are bluntly anti-American. And as Dr. Thomas Sowell said, with regards to a crisis, you can be sure that someone from Harvard was involved. Now that's amusing, but too true. Any institution that has an endowment of $53 billion deserves no public funding. Invested properly, that would give Harvard approximately $5 billion a year in interest alone. Given that kind of money, not one student should have to pay tuition, and that goes for a lot of other universities. The bigger problem is that Harvard has dozens of tentacles tied to anti-American institutions and groups that want to tear down the country. Moreover, more is afoot with regard to their huge pile of cash, which is used nefariously in so many ways to affect and mold public opinion and government policy, which is way out of their lane and must be stopped. It is shameful that it has taken this long to call institutions like Harvard to account and to stop giving taxpayer monies to institutions that are undermining the country. Kudos to the Trump administration for doing what many other administrations should have done long ago. We finally have an administration devoted to the country and people and not mere legacy. Well, that's all, folks, for today. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to check out Bluegrass Chronicles for more in-depth content. I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.